Welcome back to the Faith Infusion Podcast. Today we're diving into something that really stirred me spiritually. The other day, I was watching an episode of a new television show called The House of David, and it's on Prime Video. So today's episode is inspired by just a phrase that I heard from that show. In the scene, David's mother, she was gently telling him, she said, "Close your eyes, listen for God's voice." Then she said something that shook me. She said, "The deep calleth the deep." I mean, as soon as I heard that, I had to pause the show. Now, if you know me, if something sparks an interest or hits me spiritually, I'm going to do some digging and some researching on it. So for the last 2 weeks, I've been researching this. I've been researching that statement. And sure enough, it led me to Psalms, the 42nd chapter and the 7th verse, which says, "Deep calleth unto deep at the noise of thy waterspouts. All thy waves and thy billows are gone over me." That's more than poetic. That is like the soul is talking to you, the soul's language. So today I want to unpack what that really means. I want to talk about what his mother was telling him and what is God saying to us when we feel overwhelmed, unheard, or like we're barely holding on. We're about to talk about what happens when your soul cries out from a place you can't always explain, and how God, in all his depth, meets you there. Let's dive in. So, what does it mean when the deep calleth unto the deep? Okay, let me break that down for you. The deep in you is your soul. It's your spirit. It's your raw, unfiltered emotions. It's all your longings. It's your grief. It's your hunger for God. The deep of God is his wisdom. It's his power. It's his presence and the love that we can't measure that he shows us, he gives us. So when your deep cries out, whether it's through prayer, whether you're crying, whether it's through your silence, God doesn't leave you hanging. His deep responds. And that's what we're going to unpack today. And to do it, we're looking at 6 different biblical characters, 6 different people who cried out from deep places and were met by God, who heard them even in their faintest cry. Okay, the first person will be Zacharias. His deep was when doubt met divine promise. Zacharias' story is found in Luke, the 1st chapter, 5th verse through the 25th verse. So Zacharias was a prince. Zacharias was a priest, a faithful man. He was somebody who had served God for years. He and his wife Elizabeth, they had long prayed for a child, but those prayers had gone unanswered by God. Now, Zacharias was old, and he likely had come to the conclusion or reconciled that he was going to be childless. He was going through the motions of all his priestly duties, and that's when the angel Gabriel appeared and announced that Zacharias and Elizabeth's prayer had been heard and that they would have a son, and his name would be John the Baptist. So you hear from this angel after years of silence from God. Zacharias didn't believe that. He couldn't believe it. His doubt, it didn't come because he was being rebellious. His doubt, it came from him being disappointed over and over again, from a disappointment that had been deeply buried within him. His deep cry was one of deferred hope. God hadn't canceled the promise. Instead, God gave Zacharias silence. He gave him a season to reflect, a season to reset himself. And when his voice returned, it came with a prophetic power and praise. His deep was disappointment and disbelief. After years of praying with no visible answer, it had hardened his heart because he thought it wasn't going to happen. But you see, Zacharias, he wasn't faithless. He was just tired. He was weary. His doubt, as I said, it wasn't rebellion. It was his way of protecting himself, trying not to get his hopes up high, because every time he got his hopes up high, nothing came from it. So he was trying to maintain, basically. And yet God met him with patience after years. God didn't revoke the promise because of Zacharias' uncertainty. Instead, he honored the years of silent prayers and he delivered the answer anyway. God's deep was faithful fulfillment. It was steady, it was solid, and full of grace. Even when Zacharias struggled to believe it himself. I've been there. I've asked for something over and over and over, and God didn't do it. And I got tired. I was like, I had given over to, okay, I guess that's not for me. But then God showed up, and he did what he promised me. So now let's look at Naomi. When bitterness meets redemption. Naomi's story is in Ruth, the first chapter, the first verse through the 22nd verse. Now, Naomi's life had fell apart. She had moved to Moab during a famine, only to lose her husband and both her sons. With nothing left, she decided to go back to Bethlehem. Her grief was so deep that she changed her name from Naomi, meaning pleasant, to Mara, meaning bitter. She wasn't angry at God. She was honest. Her deep was grief. Raw, honest, and heavy. Because you not only lost your husband, you lost your sons as well. That's everything for a mother and a wife. You've lost everything. But even as she wept, Ruth stood by her side, and God's plan was unfolding through Ruth and Boaz. Naomi was restored. She became a grandmother and part of the lineage of King David and eventually Jesus Christ. Naomi's deep was silent, sorrow, and identity loss. Her grief was so overwhelming that it had reshaped how she saw herself and her story. When she renamed herself Mara, she wasn't just describing her mood. She was declaring that pain had rewritten her identity. She had went from being pleasant to bitter, hopeless, broken. It had rewritten her identity. And sometimes we can go through something that will change us forever if we're not careful, and change us in not a good way, but it can change us and our beliefs forever. But even in her bitterness, she didn't walk alone. The entire time, Ruth walked beside her. And behind the scenes, God's provision was at work. Even though she couldn't see it, God's provision was at work. Her pain didn't cancel her purpose. Through Ruth's faithfulness and Boaz's redemption, Naomi's family line became part of the lineage of Jesus. So God's deep wasn't just to comfort her. It was to restore her and to place her pain within a greater story of redemption. Yes, she lost everything, but look what she gained. Her lineage is the lineage which one of the greatest kings ever known came through, and Jesus came through. Her story was rewritten. What she thought was the end, it was only a transition into a greater legacy. Let's talk about Baruch, the burned out servant. And we've all been there. We've been spiritually burnt out. We've worked so much in the church, or we just feel like, Lord, I pray for everybody else. I need somebody to pray for me right now, because right now I am toe up. So let's talk about Baruch. Baruch's story is found in Jeremiah, the 45th chapter, the first verse through the 5th verse. Baruch was Jeremiah's his faithful scribe, and he wrote the scroll. He endured the rejections. He carried the emotional weight of the prophecy. While Jeremiah was mocked and imprisoned, Baruch stood in the shadows, absorbing the heaviness of divine judgment. Eventually, he reached his limit and he just cried out. He basically said, "This is too much. I cannot carry this anymore." God didn't say toughen up. He didn't say get a grip. He didn't say suck it up. Instead, he spoke a personal word to Baruch. God said, "Do not seek greater things for yourself. I will give your life to you as a prize wherever you go." Baruch's deep was spiritual exhaustion and insignificance. He wasn't center stage like Jeremiah, but he bore the weight of the word just the same. He was the behind the scenes servant, transcribing judgment, rejection, and sorrow with no applause, no visible reward, and no break. His deep was the cry of the faithful who feel forgotten. Yet God saw him. God spoke directly to him, not through a general prophecy, but a personal word. God gave him a personal word. That's how special he was. God gave him a personal word. He told Baruch that even though things around you would fall apart, your life will be preserved. So God's deep wasn't flashy. It was quiet. It was intimate. It was reassurance from God who covers, who protects, and honors those who endure faithfully in the shadows. Because all of us are not meant to be out front, and that's okay. God can use you just the same. Now, let's talk about someone that you may not have heard about. His name is Abimelech, the quiet hero with loud faith. And his story is also found in Jeremiah, the 38th chapter, 7th verse through the 13th verse, and also Jeremiah, the 39th chapter, the 15th verse through the 18th verse. Abimelech was an Ethiopian eunuch in King Zedekiah's palace. He wasn't a prophet or a priest. He was just a servant. But when he saw Jeremiah left to die in a muddy cistern, something stirred in him. He went boldly to the king. He advocated for Jeremiah and then personally pulled him out of the pit. God saw that act of courage, and later he sent a word through Jeremiah. "Because you have trusted in me, you will escape with your life." So Abimelech's deep was hidden courage, the kind of boldness that doesn't need a platform, but acts as conviction, as a foreigner and servant. He had no status or religious title, but he did recognize injustice when he saw it. Risking his own position and possibly his life, he intervened to save Jeremiah from certain death. Because if they had left Jeremiah in that cistern, that was certain death for him. So a deep cry wasn't a verbal prayer. It was a bold action rooted in faith. And in this story, God's deep was public affirmation and divine protection. Through the prophet Jeremiah, God spoke directly, once again, God spoke directly to Abimelech, honoring his trust and guaranteeing his safety during the coming destruction. His quiet act of bravery echoed in the heaven and was remembered in the scripture. God affirmed that even the unseen have a secure place in his plan. Now let's look at Hezekiah. When tears shifted the timeline. Hezekiah's story is found in 2 Kings, the 20th chapter, verses 1 through 6. King Hezekiah, he was sick. And the prophet Isaiah delivered a grim word. Isaiah said, "Get your house in order. You're going to die." Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and he wept bitterly. I mean, he just cried his soul out. He said, "God, you know I've been faithful." Why? Why, Lord? I've been faithful. And before Isaiah could even leave the palace, God told him to go back. He said, "Go back. I've heard Hezekiah's prayer." He said, "I've seen his tears." And God said, I'm going to heal you. I'm going to give you 15 more years to your life. Hezekiah's deep was desperation and fear. He hadn't just been told that his life was coming to an end, just to know that you're not going to make it. You're going to die. And you start thinking about all the things that you wanted to do, planned to do. Can you imagine the weight of that? And in that moment of intense vulnerability, when he turned his face to the wall and he cried out, this wasn't just a king trying to change God's mind. This was God's son, his child. He was reaching out to God. He was reaching out to his father in grief, asking for mercy. His cry wasn't eloquent, but it was real. It was real. And God, in return, God's deep was compassion and extended grace. He not only heard Hezekiah's tears, he responded. And he responded immediately. Isaiah couldn't even get out the palace before God said, turn around. Before the prophet could even leave the building, the message had changed. He had to go back and tell him that God had seen his tears and that God was going to give him more time. God added not 1 year, not 2, but 15 years to his life, proving that his heart is moved. God's heart is moved by our cries of humbleness. Hezekiah's deep was heard and met with divine tenderness. Now, my final biblical character is Manasseh. When rebellion meets mercy. Manasseh's story can be found in 2 Chronicles, the 33rd chapter, 10th verse through the 13th verse. Manasseh was one of the most evil kings in Judah's history. I'm not talking about Joseph's son, but this Manasseh was one of the most evil kings in Judah's history. He practiced witchcraft, he worshiped idols, and he even sacrificed his children. But when he was taken captive and thrown into a Babylonian prison, something in him broke. It's funny how God can get our attention sometimes by isolating us. And from that dark place, Manasseh humbled himself and he cried out to God. And God heard him and God forgave him. God restored him to his kingdom. Manasseh's deep was rebellion and regret. He had gone further than most, indulging in practices that would provoke God's anger and that led Judah astray. He ignored all the warnings. He was silencing prophets. He was defiling the temple. But when his rebellion landed him in a foreign prison, in isolation, the silence gave way to reflection. He had to go back and think about all the things he had done. And in captivity, alone and stripped of his throne and all his dignity, he cried out. He wasn't being entitled, but he was being humble. He cried out with humility, and God heard him. Not only did God forgive Manasseh, but he restored him to power. The transformation was real because when God restored Manasseh, he tore down all idols. He restored the worship and he changed the trajectory of his legacy. God's deep was radical, mercy and restoration. It went beyond what anyone would have expected. Even the most broken chapters of our lives are redeemable when placed in God's hand. So no matter how bad you think you've messed up, it's redeemable in God's hand. And I know we can be harder on ourselves than anybody else, but just know nothing you've done is irredeemable in God's hand. Every person that we've talked about today, they reached a point where they didn't have a script for their prayers. They were just raw, honest, vulnerable, and God met them not with judgment, but with depth of his own. Zacharias doubted because he had carried disappointment way too long. God gave him fulfillment and prophecy. Naomi felt forgotten, so much so that she renamed herself bitter. But God redefined her through legacy. Baruch felt crushed under spiritual weight, and God gave him rest and reassurance. Abimelech was a foreign servant with bold faith, and God personally promised him safety. Hezekiah cried with his face to a wall, and God gave him more time. Manasseh fell far from grace, but when he repented, God picked him up and restored everything that he had lost. This is what Psalm 42:7 means when it says, deep calleth unto deep. It's not just poetry. It's the echo of the soul reaching toward eternity, reaching toward God. It's about more than emotion. It's about spiritual alignment. Real moments where we're emptied out and have nothing left to give. Yet we find ourselves whispering or something just aching toward heaven. That kind of cry doesn't scare God. It draws God in. He responds from a place deeper than you can even imagine. His wisdom, his presence, his love, they don't just meet us on surface level. They rise to match the depth of our need. Wherever you are today, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, if your deep is calling, trust that God isn't distant. He's already leaning in. He's already answering in ways seen and unseen, felt and yet to be revealed. He's there. It may not look like it. It may not feel like it. Sometimes it don't even sound like it with what people saying, but know he's there. So if today's episode spoke to your heart, don't let it stop with you. Share it with someone who may be in their own deep place. That friend, that loved one, even someone who doesn't have the words to ask for help right now. Let this be your reminder. Being in deep doesn't mean being distant from God. Sometimes it's in the deepest places where his presence is felt the strongest. He's not waiting for you to climb out. He's already there. He's already there, sitting right there with you, speaking to your soul. Until next time, keep pressing forward, keep seeking the truth, and as always, stay honest, stay grounded, and stay infused with faith. I'll see you next time.